aggregate supply is sort of the counterpart to aggregate demand, and it comes in both the short run and long run flavors. In the long run, aggregate demand is a vertical line, whereas in the short run, it is upwardly sloping. Now, the question you may be asking yourself is, what is short versus long run? Well, in the short run, there are certain factors in this world that we are going to consider fixed. And the primary one is going to be wages. And we'll talk about that in a second. In the long run, everything is variable. And when everything is variable, it means the market in the long run automatically adjusts itself to whatever changes may occur, which is why output tends to be a vertical line. Regardless of price level, we'll always see long run aggregate supply at a certain point. So what's fixed in short run? Wages. We call them sticky wages. It's the sticky wages theory. It basically says that your wages are negotiated on essentially an annual basis, and they don't change until your contract is up. So for businesses, if they have a set cost for their labor, and then the prices rise for some reason because of inflation, then they don't have to pay an increase in cost in labor, and so they make more money. So as the price level rises, businesses tend to make more money and therefore are willing to produce more goods and services for their customers. And so we'll see that the short run aggregate supply curve will slope upward because of that profit motive. A higher price means a higher profit per unit, and that means that they're willing to produce more output. This profit per unit motive, is usually important in explaining when the short run aggregate supply curve shifts. It's going to shift anytime there's some sort of external change in the willingness of companies to supply goods and services. If there's just a change in the aggregate price level, then we say that there's a movement. And so we might see short run aggregate supply shift to the left or the right. Shift to the left indicates a reduction. Shift to the left is a reduction in suppliers' willingness to produce goods and services, and a shift to the right is an increase. So what causes shifts in aggregate supply? We're going to say changes in commodity prices, changes in nominal wages, and changes in productivity. All three of these kind of focus on and impact the profit per unit. So when it comes to commodity prices, commodities are the inputs that go into making stuff, and if they are less expensive, then the profit per unit to produce them it goes up. And so with an increase in commodity prices, things would become more expensive and the profit would drop, and so therefore there would be a leftward shift in aggregate supply. Businesses would not be willing to supply as much because they don't make as much money. If the commodity prices went down, it would be the opposite effect. Nominal wages is what they have to pay, are sticky, but when they change, that would change your short-run aggregate supply curve, because wages are the largest cost for firms. And so if there's an increase in nominal wages, that would increase costs of production, and an increase in cost of production lowers the profit per unit. And so there would be a leftward shift in aggregate supply. Changes in productivity also have a major impact on short-run aggregate supply. If productivity increases, it means you can make more things with the same amount of resources, essentially lowering your costs and increasing your profit per unit. So if you're a store and you shift from paper and pencil inventory system to hand price scanners, then your workers can manage your inventory quicker, and with less time it takes fewer workers than you needed before, and so your costs drop, productivity increases, profit increases, and our aggregate supply would shift to the right. In the long run, sticky wages are not an issue, because those sticky wages are renegotiated and become variable. And so we tend to see then that the long-run aggregate supply curve is a vertical line. And that vertical line intersects the horizontal axis at what we call potential output. This long-run aggregate supply curve at potential output will tend to shift either right or left because of either a change in resources, quality of resources, or technology. Typically these things are improving, which is why we generally see long-run aggregate supply shifting to the right. If we have more resources, that means that the economy can produce more things in theory. If our resources are better, it means that we have to use essentially fewer resources to make more stuff. It lowers our prices, our costs, and that would help cause potential output to shift. And then with improved technology and better productivity, again, there's more possible goods and services that can be produced with even the same amount of resources, which would push our long-run aggregate supply curve to the right. What we see is that, generally speaking, output will fluctuate a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right of our potential output. So actual is just kind of hovering around that point. And so, and you can see in the graph that the blue line is our actual output and the black line is this kind of theoretical potential output, and they tend to mirror each other quite nicely. And so in the long run, what we would expect is that we would be producing at the point at which short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply intersect. And what happens is that in the long run, they not only do we produce at that intersection, but the economy itself will adjust as a result of what's going on. So in this scenario, if real GDP, which is measured as Y1, output 1, is less than the potential output, then what we would see is a situation in which we're basically in recession. We could be producing more than we actually are. If that's the case, then workers presumably would be willing to accept lower wages in order to maintain their jobs, because people in a recession begin to lose their jobs. And if there are lower wages, lower nominal wages, for example, that would reduce the cost of business, it would increase profit per unit, and it would cause short-run aggregate supply to shift to the right up until the point at which it intersects with potential output, and that's kind of where we would stop until once our actual output equaled potential output. Or if we looked at the opposite scenario and said in a strong economy where real GDP, which is measured at Y2, is greater than potential output, we would say then in this case there's essentially more workers than at the natural rate. We're beginning to see competition because there's now fewer people available for new jobs, and so there's going to be competition that might push wages up. And with an increase in the need for labor and an increase in production costs caused by a rise in wages, we would see a drop in profit per unit. We would see short-run aggregate supply shift to the left, and we would see actual output begin to drift closer and closer to potential output until the point at which the short-run aggregate supply curve intersected the long-run aggregate supply curve at the point where actual output equaled potential. So that's kind of an overview of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. We're going to do some problems in class, and be sure to read your textbook and ask good questions. I'll see you then.